Hello, my name is Emmett Gil, and I'm here today to discuss my research on social work in sports. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There are over 81 Masters in Social Work programs with big-time Division I sports programs. The athletic director at the University of Connecticut is an MSW. There are 731 social work programs, yet none of them offer coursework in social work in sports. Today, I would like to talk to you about my research and the utility of integrating sports into social work education. One of my goals is to join my fellow social work researchers as a trailblazer in integrating sports, both on the professional and collegiate level, into social work education. My first piece of research pertains to mental health in intercollegiate athletics. It's time for social workers to get in the game. And in general, what I try to do is to take single subject research designs using documentation from media reports and archival data to form case studies to talk about issues in athletics along with social work themes. So in mental health and intercollegiate athletics, it's time for social workers to get in the game. I talk about Anthony Von Tour, a football player from the University of Washington, a star cornerback, who unfortunately suffered from a bipolar disorder. Anthony Von Tour went off his medications for over 1 year, and then things began to go awry. He missed practices, started to get in fights, didn't go to class. 1 year later, Anthony Von Tour died after a manic episode while he was in police custody. And so the goal here, again, is to take some of the pertinent issues in professional and collegiate athletics and discuss them in the context of social work themes, social work practice, and social work education. My second piece of research is also a single subject research design. The blunt truth, marijuana policies in Division I sports. If anyone reads the newspaper, you certainly understand that marijuana use is up among adolescents, on college campuses, and yes, in college and professional sports. This particular single subject research design is a case study of a football player that I used to work with, B. Nix. B. Nix was destined for the NFL, 6'7", over 300-pound left tackle. Nonetheless, B. Nix also had a severe dependence on marijuana. This particular case study documents how B. Nix tried to quit use, tried to reduce harm, tried to endure the cravings. And B. Nix ended up quitting. Unfortunately, he ended up quitting football. And so in this particular case study, I talk about the implications for social work practice with student athletes who have substance use disorders. I also talk about substance abuse policies in collegiate sports, as well as drug testing amongst collegiate athletes. With the situation with B. Nix, I always wonder about student athletes who break unspecified team rules and whether or not we're covering up for substance use and dependence. And so from single subject research designs, my research has expanded to also look at controversies in college sports. I'm sure you've heard of Duke lacrosse. I'm sure you're familiar with Rutgers and Don Imus and the women's basketball team. I'm sure you're familiar with the UNC academic scandal. Nonetheless, my latest case study deals with Penn State University and the Jerry Sandusky scandal at Penn State. In this particular case study, it's more of a systematic approach. Did Penn State and local and state welfare officials put the interest of sports ahead of their moral responsibility to protect children? The Freach report says that Penn State failed to protect the well-being of vulnerable children. And this particular case study supports the notion that not only did Penn State fail to protect children, but also local and state welfare officials. Did you know that 4 social workers came into contact with Jerry Sandusky prior to him being convicted of 45 counts of sexual abuse of young, vulnerable men? And so unlike mental health in collegiate sports or the blunt truth marijuana use in Division I sports policies, this particular case study takes a more systematic approach and looks at the interaction between collegiate sports programs and their work with community organizations and vulnerable populations. In other words, this case study discusses the implications for athletic departments who are in partnership with community-based organizations and discusses how we need to make sure that we protect the vulnerable children that we are actually trying to empower. But in addition to documenting some of the pertinent issues in professional and collegiate athletics, it's also important that my research edify the actuality that sports on the collegiate, professional, youth, and secondary sports levels is also an outstanding area of content to integrate into social work education. And so one of my pieces of scholarship, integrating sports into social work education, talks about the social work profession and how sports is outstanding content for our social work practitioners. So it discusses things like accreditation, EPAS standards, social work content areas, and most of all, the mission of social work programs, which is to protect vulnerable populations. It's undisputed that student athletes are one of the most visible, highly sought after populations on college campuses. Yet if you open up the newspaper on a daily or weekly basis, you will see that it's also a vulnerable population. So this particular scholarship talks about how the experiences of student athletes fit within human behavior, social justice, vulnerable populations, as well as other social work content areas. And it talks about the benefits of integrating sports into social work education. We're providing another practice area for social works to get involved in. We're also providing an opportunity for student athletes who have interest in areas like criminal justice, sociology, and social work to come into a profession with their experiences and leave with an education that they can go out and practice and help other student athletes. So there are a lot of benefits to integrating sports into social work education. But there are also a lot of barriers. There are faculty attitudes about student athletes. They're the way that peers, their non-student athlete peers, feel about student athletes. So there are a lot of barriers to integrating sports into social work education. But there are a number of benefits. And then my latest piece. I'm certainly sure you've heard about Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, and Donald Sterling. And so in collaboration with some of my colleagues, I'm currently writing a piece on Ray Rice and domestic violence. Is there a place for social work in professional sports? And like the Jerry Sandusky piece, the Duke lacrosse piece, Rutgers and Don Imus, the UNC academic scandal, this particular scholarship takes a systematic approach in terms of examining Black male masculinity and how it fits within the larger context of not only sports, but also society. It talks about the good Black male and the bad Black male, and how it's difficult for some professional athletes with all of their athletic prowess and acts of masculinity to taper those when they're in society. The interesting part about this work is that my colleagues and I, after documenting this information and publishing this case study, we hope to take it to the National Football League. We hope to take our case study on the Atlanta Hawks and new racism to the National Basketball League. Because the difference between social workers and sociologists, no disrespect to my colleagues in sociology, but social workers are about practice. And so our goal is to transform our scholarship into actual practices. It is important that the social work profession get involved in some of the issues that we are currently experiencing in the National Football League and the National Basketball Association. When you talk about issues like child abuse and Adrian Peterson, or domestic violence and Ray Rice, or the numerous sexual assaults that are being reported in the NFL, there's a place for social workers, social work education, and social work research. I'd also like to just briefly share some upcoming publications. In the near future, I will be writing a piece that includes Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Athletes and Activism in a Post-Ferguson Era. I'll also be writing on the heels of the Jerry Sandusky at Penn State controversy and looking at sexual abuse in secondary school sports in the post-Sandusky era. Because one of the benefits from the whole Sandusky scandal at Penn State was the actuality that there was an increase in reporting in sexual abuse involving students who are athletes and teachers who are coaches in junior high and high school sports. And lastly, a piece that I'm very excited about is called More Than Lost Games, NCAA Enforcement and the Implications of Mental Health for Black Student Athletes. This piece will look at the impact of NCAA enforcement and makes the argument that it is more than about lost games. It will take an in-depth look at situations like Todd Gurley. Mr. Gurley was suspended for 4 games from the University of Georgia, and upon his return to the football field, suffered a season-ending injury. What are the mental health implications for Mr. Gurley? As I move to close, I have a slide up that talks about the problem isn't the methodology. It's the attitude you have towards my methodology. And I'd simply like to say to all my social work colleagues, fellow researchers, fellow practitioners, and definitely to the students, part of the work that my colleagues and I have engaged in and the way that we engaged in is very necessary. You see, there are not a lot of databases that include data on professional and collegiate athletes. It's simply not there. Can you imagine at this particular time us going to the New England Patriots or the Seattle Seahawks and asking their professional athletes to fill out a survey so that we could document some research? Or going to the University of North Carolina or Vanderbilt and asking them to expose and make their student athletes available for our research needs? It's just not happening. But what my colleagues and I are relying on is the use of media reports, documents, archival records, interviews, and other qualitative methods to create some pretty sound mixed methods qualitative research. And the reason that we've engaged in this type of methodology is simply because we need to introduce the world to the possibilities of a collaboration between social work and sports.